cap off the Abbott government's terrible week, the Victorian Liberal government yesterday became the first in 59 years to be thrown out after just one term.
The people of Victoria have today said no to tired, negative politics.
Tony Abbott wouldn't come to Victoria this election, so Victorians have gone to him with a clear message.
We leave the state in better condition than what we inherited only 4 years ago.
The Liberals went from a very narrow lead to a fairly big loss, with the Greens picking up their first seat in the lower house and maybe one or two more. Joining me is John Roskam, Head of the Institute of Public Affairs, and Cassandra Wilkinson of the Centre for Independent Studies. John, what happened in Victoria?
A very disappointing result for the coalition. This is what happens when a political party doesn't differentiate itself from another party, when it doesn't stand up for what it believes. And the first 2 years of the coalition government were effectively wasted.
Absolutely right. How much will this hurt Tony Abbott, though, Cassandra?
Well, unfortunately, it's given Labor a great boost of energy, and from that will come money, and money changes elections.
Yeah, but it's strange, isn't it? Because Daniel Andrews, in his speech last night, didn't criticise the Abbott government. One of his front benchers, Martin Pakula, said this had nothing to do really with Tony Abbott. But Bill Shorten was there and he was making the case. So is he right? How much of this does this have to do with the Abbott government?
This election had a lot more to do with Ted Baillieu than Tony Abbott. The reality is the coalition in Victoria was behind Labor long before Tony Abbott was ever Prime Minister. And Tony Abbott doesn't seem to be led in the saddlebags of Mike Baird in New South Wales. Campbell Newman will win or lose, not according to anything Tony Abbott does. This is a result about the Victorian coalition and the Labor Party in Victoria, not about Tony Abbott.
And yet, Cassandra, I think this adds to the pressure on Tony Abbott to change. Do you think what lessons would he or should he or could he learn from what happened in Victoria?
Yeah, I think John's right. In the media's eyes, defeat always has 1,000 fathers, and Tony will share the blame for this, along with Baillieu and many others. But you can't argue with the choices that were made not to have him here. Clearly, he wasn't seen as a positive. I would say this is a fantastic, very timely warning to the federal government front bench that they have to lift their game.
Well, it's interesting, John, as you said, differentiate yourself. The argument against Tony Abbott often put is that his government's too radical and right-wing. It's got a tack to the centre. You could not possibly say the Victorian Liberal government was too right-wing and radical. In fact, the exact opposite. So what lessons you draw? And I want to draw a contrast. Queensland Premier Campbell Newman this week posted figures showing the government spending this year is actually down by $200 million or something like that, and is half the projected deficit, and even so is ahead in most polls coming into next year's election.
That's right. Here in Victoria, the coalition on some policies tack not just to the centre, but to the left. And the issue for Tony Abbott is, what we discovered in Victoria is, voters won't accept the solution if they don't know what the problem is. And here in Victoria, we had scandal after scandal, multi-billion-dollar blowout after blowout, and yet the coalition didn't talk about it. They simply presented their plan, which was one big road versus Labor's 50 level crossings, and Labor won. That's not vision, that's not ideas, that's not the future.
Labor went local.
That's right.
Let's go to Tony Abbott's other problems this week. He knows the government is in trouble and must change, right? That's clearly happening. They're trying to attack Labor more, etc., etc. Should dumping the Medicare co-payment be part of that change?
Leaving aside the need for price signals in the health system, this is absolute poison, and it's poison across every seat, and they need to work out very quickly what to give away in the Senate to get some. If they can't get their budget passed, they are toast, and this seems to be one of those things they're going to have to give away.
Yeah, but that's, you put your finger on exactly the dilemma, isn't it? Like, it's good policy, bad politics, got to dump it, but if they do, they aren't tackling the budget deficit that will kill them anyway.
But it was sort of a clumsy move. I mean, there are prices all over the health system. They're just in odd places, and the biggest signal we have is waiting lists, which everybody hates, which is what you get when you have no price signals. So you do need change, but this was poorly explained. It's very unpopular. When you look at that against, say, getting rid of the entire Federal Education Department, which would bother very few people, hardly any actual Australian families would be affected or schools would be affected. That's the kind of thing, you know, when you look at Mike Baird's success, he has steadily cut back wages, largely public sector salaries and conditions, pulled back the extent of government without causing the kind of heartache that something as emblematic as the co-payment has done.
It's interesting, John, one of my readers this morning on my blog gave a really interesting suggestion. You know, the government's saying the first, what is it, 8 or something, Medicare visits to the doctor will hit you with a co-payment, and then for kids and all that, it's free. Why not the opposite? Why not say the first number of visits are free and then you'll be charged?
Well, exactly. We need the co-payment, and I agree with Cassandra's analysis. What I don't like is this discussion about barnacles. These are not barnacles. These are necessary reforms to fix the budget and make the budget sustainable. And the problem is we're getting rid of so-called barnacle after barnacle after barnacle. What's left?
What's left?
This is absolutely necessary reform.
If that budget doesn't come under control, they're toast anyway.
And no one's talked about, well, if we get rid of the barnacles, what else is there?
Yeah, yep. But then you tell me, Cassandra, why is the Prime Minister's office briefing journalists that this barnacle will go, and then Joe Hockey straight to the camera says, no, it won't? What's going on?
Well, I mean, I guess like everyone else, I don't know. It seems crazy. It seems like that there needs to be far more discipline. Maybe Cabinet just needs to spend a lot more time together as a team owning the agenda of this government.
But it also shows, doesn't it, a sort of mismatch, and as a former advisor you might have a view on this, but the Prime Minister's office seems to be briefing as if it was more powerful and more in the know than the treasurer of the nation. That is an imbalance that should not be.
Well, one of the things most staff don't understand is that staff are not in Cabinet, and for a government to function effectively you need a core of Cabinet ministers who, whether or not they like each other, can work as a loyal team. And, you know, all effective governments have a half a dozen ministers who are on song with a single set of objectives, and they back each other in.
Now, John, turning back the heat on Labor, that's what the government's been poor at. The real focus should be on them for pretending we can spend anything we like on these grand social programs, the money will just look after itself. Here's a great example from the Labor's health spokesman this week saying the government should drop the Medicare co-payment but keep the $20 billion medical research fund that the co-payment is meant to pay for. Have a look. Have a look.
If the government believes that medical research is important, as Labor does, then it should find the money from consolidated revenue.
John.
Just remind me who Labor spokesperson is.
Catherine King.
This is a demonstration of all that is problematic with Labor's position. Where is the money going to come from? A
big tree in the middle of Australia.
And while the government has been arguing over minor reductions in the ABC budget, which are well overdue, there's been no discussion as to what Labor's alternative is going to be. That's the problem.
I find it incredible. Just pay from consolidated revenue, this great big pot of endless money. We'll be back with more after this break.